right, hello everyone. Good to see you all again. Hope you guys are staying safe and staying healthy out there. Going to go ahead and get started with another ancient world history video on the Roman Republic. So this video that I'm putting out there, this is lesson number 2 on the Roman Republic. And specifically, we're looking at government in the Roman Republic. To recap from the last video that I put out there, we talked about the origins of Rome. So we discussed their geography and their location in Europe on the Italian peninsula. We talked about some of the cultural influences that they got from the Latins, the Etruscans, and the Greeks. And then finally, we talked about the founding of the city-state of Rome and how it was ruled for about 100 years as a monarchy, as a kingdom. A quick reminder, you can always check the notes that we'll be doing with these videos. For these ones, the Stark notes are on Module 6, the Roman World and Early Christianity. It's Section 1C, the Early Republic, and it begins about the bottom of page 1, goes down through all of about page 2. Quick reminder, don't forget about the Module 6, Lesson 1 textbook reading. I will post this video to that page, but you guys can get started on that whenever you're ready. And then finally, for this video here today, I'm going to do something a little different. I am not going to be narrating through one of my own PowerPoints. Instead, I found a great Prezi presentation on the internet, and I'm going to narrate over that. The author for that, as you can see on your screen, was a woman named Christina Costas, and she did a great job, so I wanted to give a shout out to her. So with that being said, let's go ahead and get started. If you hear jingling in the background, by the way, that's my dogs up here wrestling with one another. Hey! All day, every day. Anyway. So I am going to go ahead and hide my webcam video of myself. You'll just be hearing my narration from here over. All right. Hey, knock it off. So, the Roman Republic. As we discussed in our previous video, it started as a very small city-state on the central coast of Italy. Because of its location, the very fertile soil they had, and the natural defenses, it allowed them to grow into a big, big city and support a large population. There's the Italian peninsula right there. Anyway, as Rome became bigger, it needed to develop a government to control all of the people living within that city and the surrounding area. As its society grew, you can see they needed some form of government. Originally, they just worked as self-sustaining communities, but then they needed a government that would unite all of its people. Originally, the Roman government fell into a monarchy. As I discussed in the last video, the Etruscan people invaded the city of Rome around 600 CE, and they set up a monarchy ruled by one king. Rome had a series of 7 kings before the monarchy ended in the year 509 CE. However, the people of Rome, specifically the elites in Rome, put an end to this monarchy because they were afraid that it would give one person too much absolute power. So as you can see here, again, they did not want a king. Now, to understand the government system that the Romans came up with, you have to understand their social class system. The Romans had 2 main social classes of citizens, and I will say I disagree with this Prezi presentation on that point. They had more than just 2 social classes. They just had 2 classes of citizens. And those citizens were broken up into Patricians and Plebeians. Now, like I said, this doesn't account for the non-citizens, such as the foreigners that lived in Rome, the slaves, of which there were many, the women, of which there were obviously many, and then also free slaves that did not have citizenship rights. That being said, the upper class of Roman society were called patricians. These were the wealthy landowners and noble families that made up the aristocracy. They were also the ones that held the high positions in early society. The lower class of citizens, made up of most of the free people, were known as plebeians. These were your regular farmers, traders, craftsmen. Farming and craftsmanship were very much valued in Rome. However, these people were not the wealthy upper class, but they did make up a large portion of the population. In time, Rome went on to establish what was called a republic. In 509 BCE, the last Roman king, an Etruscan named Superbus or Tarquin the Proud, was overthrown. The Roman elite established the Republic, which was designed to spread out that power so that one person could not gain too much power. Now, a quick recap on what a republic is. We want to make sure that we distinguish this from the democracy, the direct democracy that you saw in Athens over in Greece. A republic is similar to a democracy in that the power lies with the people. However, the difference with the direct democracy is that the rulers that make the decisions are elected by the people. This is different from the Athenian direct democracy, where all the free citizens voted on every single issue. In the republic, it gives power to the people by letting them elect those leaders who will then make the key decisions in government. Now, the Romans came up with a slogan, SPQR. It was the official, you can say, like the slogan, the catchphrase of the Roman Republic. And it stood for Senatus Populesque Romanus, or, as they would have said, the Senate and people of Rome. So those upper class and then the rest of the people. Now, in the Republic of Rome, it consisted of 3 different branches. Many of you are probably thinking this sounds familiar. And if you are thinking that, I'm very proud of you because it means you paid attention in your 8th grade civics and economics class. The Republic of the United States government is very much modeled after the Roman Republic, but there are some minor differences that we need to make note of. It consisted of 3 branches: the consuls, the Senate, and the Assembly. The consuls in the Roman Republic were very much like the President of the United States. You could think of them almost like the executive branch. These 2 people were elected by the Senate, and they were responsible for supervising government affairs, commanding the army, and serving as the overall supreme judges. So you could argue that they had some executive branch roles as well as judicial branch roles. Now, their government was different from the American government in that they had 2 consuls. I want you guys to wrap your mind around that. Imagine that there were 2 presidents in the United States of America. All right, imagine after our last election, both Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton became president, and then they had to share powers and responsibilities. And one week, one person would be responsible for one thing. The next week, they would switch responsibilities. This was how the consuls worked in Rome. They actually were checking one another's power. Also, unlike in the United States, where the president serves a 4-year term, the consuls in Rome only served for 1 year. When their term was over, they could not become elected consul again for 10 years. The most powerful branch, arguably, in the Roman government was the Senate. The Senate was the lawmaking body of patricians, so it was made up entirely of those upper-class citizens. There were 300 members total in the Senate. They had a lot of the lawmaking or legislative duties. You would think of them very much the same way you would think of the Congress in the United States, and specifically the Senate. If you were elected to the Senate, you served for life. So some of their responsibilities included managing the money and finances of the government, passing laws, and then also taking part in foreign affairs, affairs with other countries and other governments. The third branch of the Roman Republic was the Assembly of Centuriates. This was the main governing group, the main group that got together and voted for leaders. They voted on a lot of those laws submitted by the consuls. They were also the only body that could declare war. And finally, they were involved in electing government officials. Membership and voting in the centuriate assemblies were determined by wealth, birth, and where you lived. Finally, the Roman Republic had a secret hidden weapon, you could call it. A different tool that is not available in our current form of government. And this was something known as a dictatorship. So you typically think of bad things when you hear of a dictator, right? You think of a bad leader like an Adolf Hitler or a Joseph Stalin type figure who is power hungry and rules absolutely with an iron fist and does nothing but create misery for the rest of the world. You have to kind of rework your world vision of that word to imagine the way that the Romans imagined a dictator. For them, this was just a really wise government leader who, whenever they were faced with an emergency, they would give this person absolute power only for a period of 6 months or until the crisis was over. So maybe if the Romans were at war, they would appoint a dictator so that that dictator could make quick, easy, decisive actions. You might also argue that in a situation like we're dealing with now, with the coronavirus pandemic, that the Romans in their world would have elected a dictator to take charge of things. All right, that's a little Sacha Baron Cohen humor, but I enjoy it. Anyway, let's talk again about those social classes. The upper class in Rome were known as Patricians, and they held most of the power. This led to a struggle within the Republic. First of all, the Patricians at one point held all of the consulships. They dominated the Senate and the assemblies. They controlled pretty much everything in society. The plebeians, on the other hand, were given few social privileges and they had almost no voice in government. Remember, when you think about the American Revolution, these sort of things come to mind. No taxation without representation. Well, the plebeians, they had similar arguments. They had similar things that made them upset with the patricians. They could be lost as property or sold into slavery. They weren't allowed to marry anyone in the patrician class. A lot of decisions were made about them without their permission. Now, where this came into be an issue was when it came to the military. Throughout all of its history, Rome, both as a republic and as an empire, really valued military service. Serving in the military was deemed to be very important. In fact, you could not become a member of the Senate without having served in the military in the past. But at this point in time, many of the military members, or legionnaires as we would call them, were made up of plebeians. So meanwhile, Rome ends up in all of these wars. They're in wars with a lot of Italian neighbors, whether it's the Etruscans, whether it's other Greeks, whether it's some Gallic people, whoever they may have been, the Romans were constantly at wars. And it was the plebeians doing most of the fighting, even though they didn't get much of a say in the government. Because of this, it came to a head, and the plebeians said enough. They told the patricians that if they didn't make some concessions, if they didn't let the plebeians have more of a voice in government, that they would leave the army and let all those foreigners come through and conquer the land. As such, the patricians gave a little ground. They let the plebeians have some things. So, for all these years, there were Roman laws that were established to basically protect citizens like the plebeians from being abused by the patricians. However, because the plebeians didn't know how to read all these laws, it was easy for the patricians to take advantage of them and basically figure out ways around the law. What the plebeians did was put a stop to this. In 450 BCE, the plebeians realized that the patricians had been taking advantage of them, and they started to demand equal rights under the law. So, what they decided was that those equal rights needed to be out there, clear in the public for everyone to see. And what they did was they went out there, and when the patricians said no, the plebeians all left the city and camped outside of its walls for many days. Without those plebeians, the city could not function properly, and the patricians had to meet their demands. Thus began what were known as the 12 Tables. The patricians agreed to the plebeian demands, and they began writing down all of those formerly unwritten laws. In fact, not only did they write them down, they carved them onto 12 bronze tablets. They then took those bronze tablets and posted them right in the middle of the city center of Rome, which was called the Forum. You can think of the Forum almost like the downtown. All right, if you're thinking of Williamsburg, Virginia, it would be right there in the center of Dog Street. All right, if you're thinking of New York City, it would be like Times Square. If you're thinking of Washington, D.C., it would be the National Mall. They put those laws out there for everyone to see so that everyone knew the law of the 12 Tables. And those laws applied to every citizen. What this meant was that everyone had equal protection under the law. And this was the foundation for all of Roman law, applied equally to everyone and taught in schools. You could argue that the 12 Tables of Rome are very, very similar to the United States Constitution. No person is above those laws, and no local government is allowed to create laws that violate those. So as a result, as you can see, the plebeians began to gain more equality. The patricians still represented the majority of government, especially in the Senate. However, these changes did make the republic more representative of the entire people. It also led to new class distinctions, rich versus poor, wealthy versus unwealthy, whatever it might be. Right? But they did work together to keep control of the Senate and hold power in the republic. That being said, this still only accounted for a certain amount of citizens in Roman society. It didn't account for foreigners, slaves, freed slaves, or women, but it did begin to lay the foundations of giving most men a voice in society. So when it comes to the legacy of the Roman Republic, you have to understand that it lasted from 509 to 27 BCE. That is almost 500 years. When you think about that, the United States of America is not even 250 years old. So the Roman Republic lasted for over twice as long as the United States of America. And while it continued to change over time, its original ideas and principles would remain and would go on to influence many of our own founding fathers here in the United States of America. Those ideas of separation of power, those ideas of a republican government, those ideas of electing your leaders and giving different people a voice, and then finally, the idea of a supreme law, the Constitution of the United States, which had its equivalent in the Roman 12 Tables. All right, everyone, I really hope you enjoyed this video. I know that it was a little bit longer, but it's important for us to understand many of those parallels and similarities that exist between the Roman Republic and the United States of America, because that was really, really what influenced many of our founding fathers. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Remember, I'm going to post this on the Module 6, Lesson 1 textbook reading, which you guys can go in and start answering some of the questions on that. Don't forget also to make sure that you guys finish your Greece/Rome study guide packets for when you come back to class. Hope you all stay safe, stay healthy, and take care of yourselves. And I'll see you next time.